Hello family, it's African Esquire and I'm here with a new video. You know, I try not to disparage too many people online, especially people just who love black people and try to do right by black people and try to think of different things and different theories that support the overall liberation of our people. And so for that, I usually don't try to go after certain people or certain YouTube personalities, certain bloggers, because to me, as long as we all agree on some things, we should be able to work together with the overall liberation of our people. But I have to say, it irritates me so much, and I'm speaking about Yvette Carnell specifically, but she's not the only one that does this. When you have people who 90% of what they put out, 90% of their videos, 90% of their articles, 90% of anything they have to say is not them offering a solution for black people, but rather them trying to tear down other people who have solutions for black people. Understanding that there's no way that all of us are going to agree on the same issues. So my problem is, I was online and I came across some tweets by Yvette Carnell. And she was referencing an article by Antonio Moore, and I'm going to break down this article momentarily. But basically referencing the article and criticizing Pan-Africanism. Because as I've heard her say in other videos, she's not a Pan-Africanist. She's also not a black nationalist. She's not someone that believes. And she calls it do-goodism whenever you have people who say that black people, we should control the economics in our community, that black people, we need to have businesses, and that should be our focus. And my thing is, it's completely fine if you don't believe in it. You trying to convince other people not to believe in it, that's where it's going to become iffy, because frankly, we're all entitled to have different beliefs about what would be right or wrong about our people, because we're all inside of different spheres. We all see different things and we all have different experiences. That's what we have to understand. A lot of our thinking, a lot of our ideologies, a lot of what we think would be right for our people is based on our own experience. And if you haven't had certain experiences, or if I haven't had certain experiences, I might not think what you think. So the best thing to do is to, rather than try to change someone's mind or make someone think that they're wrong, is to try to learn and educate yourself. And then have healthy discourse, not calling people names, not calling people do-for-selfers, not calling people things or calling them irrational, saying that they don't have the solution, because really all of us are equally out here trying to figure out what to do for our people. There's not one person that has the solution. There's not one person that has the answer. All of us have our own thinking, our own thoughts, and anyone who thinks that they have all the answers, you really need to check yourself, because no one has ever had all the answers. So I'm very passionate about this, because this is something I've always thought about her, is that she's such a brilliant person. She puts out really good arguments. She has definitely put out arguments where she brings data and things like that. But at the end of the day, whether or not you have your arguments or not you have your beliefs, understand there's always been people throughout history who have had differences of beliefs. If you know the whole history of Marcus Garvey versus W.E.B. Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois was a beast. He was a genius. He was the first African-American to graduate from Harvard. He was an intellectual genius. Marcus Garvey didn't have that same background. He also was a genius in his own right. So funny that W.E.B. Du Bois spent so much time talking about Marcus Garvey and trying to down his theories, and then later in W.E.B. Du Bois' life, he ends up becoming a Pan-Africanist and really advocating the same things that Marcus Garvey was saying. It doesn't mean that one person was smarter than the other. It means that one person had different experiences. Because as you hear from Marcus Garvey, what brought Marcus Garvey to feeling that the solution was Pan-Africanism was that he would go to Jamaica, he would go to Europe, he would go to different islands in the Caribbean, and he came to the United States. And he going and having all these travels, having that experience, having seen that no matter where you go in the world, African people, we're all suffering, having that experience, that is what made him early on become a Pan-Africanist, whereas W.E.B. Du Bois originally was an assimilationist, and he became a Pan-Africanist. So before I get started with this article and dissecting it, I just want to quickly lay out why, the short reason why I think it's important for Black people to consider Pan-Africanism. Understand that I am not someone who needs you to feel like you're a Pan-Africanist, especially if you're an African in America. Well, I think it would be great and for your own good to be a Pan-Africanist, ultimately for your own good. Maybe not in the moment, maybe not in the here and now, but long term, if you're thinking about the future of your children, if you're thinking about the future of your descendants, if you're thinking forward and understanding how capitalism is crippling this country, and at some point this has to stop. if you're thinking forward like that, then I would think that you would be a Pan-Africanist. At the same time, Marcus Garvey said, hey, I have no desire for that every single black person go back to Africa, because some of y'all aren't going to be good for Africa. Some of y'all are going to bring your strife. Some of y'all are going to bring negative things to Africa. So we don't need all of you. So understand, while I am a Pan-Africanist, I advocate for the unity, African unity, and I certainly advocate that African people in America, it's in our best interest to identify ourselves as African and see the economic the economic relationship that we share with African people throughout the diaspora. While I personally believe that, I don't need you to necessarily think that. You can disagree with me on that. You can have different beliefs about that. You can believe in some other form of Black empowerment, and it's completely fine. And guess what? Where we do agree with each other, let's work together, and where we don't agree with each other, let's not agree with each other. But I'm saying this to say that this is not me trying to compel every single Black person to do it. I think it's in our best interest, but I do think that you are entitled to your own beliefs, and if you don't want to mess with Pan-Africanism, don't mess with Pan-Africanism. Briefly, the reasons, the rationales that a lot of people have come to and why people become Pan-Africanists, one is that you have to understand that in order to survive in a country as a minority, and we are a minority in America, we're about 13% of the population. First of all, in order to survive, you have to have some type of people backing you. So we know that if people from China come here, and if they are oppressed and they have something happening to them, they have people in China who are going to say, hey, you're not doing this right. You're not treating our people right. They're going to stand up for their people, and they're going to represent them and be a voice for them. We don't have that, which is why you can have people get killed by the police. You can have genocide inside of prisons. You can have school system failing, and there's no one that's going to speak up on behalf of us, because right now Africa is under occupation. The other thing that we have to understand, and many of us have heard the quote, Martin Luther King, who was an assimilationist, said later in his life, we were integrating into a burning house or a burning building, one or the other. And the same thing stands today. If you understand capitalism and if you understand imperialism, you understand that the West is very dependent on Africa. And capitalism is very dependent on weaker nations, not just Africa, but dependent on Latin America, mostly Africa, because Africa is the most minerally wealthy continent. But places in Latin America, places in Asia, the West is very dependent on these places. So the question is, how long can they survive by taking the resources and taking the goods that these people produce, and how long can they survive taking those things and continuing this system based off of the riches and spoils of other people? Many people would say they can't survive very long. Malcolm X said that the time is very limited for this system. You can't continue and survive based off of taking and taking, and eventually the well's going to run dry. But even before that, before the well runs dry, you're going to have people who are going to wake up and realize, hey, you can't have our land, you can't have our resources, you can't have our things. That is a natural occurrence that's going to happen, and many people have predicted that. Karl Marx has predicted that. Lenin has predicted that, and so there's a real realization that this system cannot continue to exist as it does. So if it can't exist as it does, why is your political, economic, social philosophy just integrating, assimilating, and while you're assimilating, trying to get as much as you can? Why not understand that this thing is not going to last too long? I mean, I know we're meant to think that America is going to last forever, that America is going to exist 500, 1,000 years from now, but we don't know if it does exist. We don't know what type of way it will exist. We don't know how the economy will exist. We don't know how businesses, if they will still be there, because frankly, America is dependent on other people to continue to turn a blind eye to their corruption and imperialism and military policies. We don't know if there's going to be a World War III. We don't know if there's going to be a depression. I mean, many of you know, Marxist philosophy would say at some point you're going to have a depression. You're going to have the economy just going to give out, and it's happened before. So we don't know what's going to happen, but I tell you for sure this is not going to continue the way that it has. So for that reason, I would say that it's an incentive to not just think of yourself as a Pan-Africanist, but try to imagine a system that's not based off of exploitation. Try to imagine a system where people don't have to be like a product or be laborers for the capital of someone else, but instead try to imagine a system where all of us are treated equitably and where all of us have a way to live and to not be on the streets, to not be poor, to not be homeless, but to be taken care of well. A system where all of us can have that and not just one person on top, because anytime you have capitalism, you're always going to have that one person that's on top and other people follow after them. So that's the idea behind, that's really socialism, but Pan-Africanism. Many people who are Pan-Africanists were also socialists, because understanding that this system that ruined a lot of the economies in Africa was completely based off of profit, was completely based off of gaining things, and not based off of being doing what's best for the people and building what's best for the people at one time. So with that being said, I'm going to go through this article. So the article, I think, is what started the conversation. It's an article by Antonio Moore from Tone Talks. The article is entitled, African Americans Are More Than Just Africans in America. So I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm going to read excerpts that I wanted to pick out and discuss. And, of course, you can look up the whole article. Again, it's African Americans Are More Than Just Africans in America. Now, he says, recent immigrants from the continent of Africa are striving to create what amounts to a solidarity of sameness with American DOS, which means descendants of slavery. So he doesn't say Black Americans. He doesn't say African Americans. To him, we should think of ourselves as descendants of slavery. I'm going to talk about why that's I have an issue with that, why it's problematic, and why, to me, why would you want to identify your identity as being descendant of slavery? But moving on. One built largely around a narrative which encourages all Blacks to view the continent of Africa as a sort of unified country and the United States of America as merely a transient one. They envision a broad solidarity built on identitarian oneness that, by its very nature, undermines the unique claim of reparations being owed to American descendants of slavery, as a result of particular injustices they have borne since arriving in the country. Furthermore, this imagined coalition complicates the issue of who should even have a right to speak as a representative of American descendants of slavery on repairing the damage wrought upon Black American families. So the first issue I have with that is that he essentially says that the solidarity movement of Pan-Africanism, let's be very clear, this is a movement that has existed for a very long time. It's been I think maybe the later half of the 18th century, of the 1800s. That's where you really had people coming out as Pan-Africanists, people in the Caribbean, people in Europe. It's existed before Marcus Garvey, although Marcus Garvey is probably the most famous Pan-Africanist. He's not the one that originated it. It was not about solidarity because of Black skin. It's not about skin complexion. It's about being African. So the first question is, do you not acknowledge that you're African? If you don't acknowledge that you're African, then what are you? Because guess what? If you take someone from China, I don't know why I keep using China. Let's use another country. If you take someone from, if you take someone from indigenous Australia, and you take away the indigenous language that they have learned, you put them in America, you teach them English, they don't know that language, they don't know anything, they only know themselves as being an American, that person's still Australian. It doesn't matter whether or not you've taught them English, whether or not you erased their history, whether or not you told them that you are this, they are still an Australian. That is what their DNA says. And so when it comes to Africans in America, it doesn't matter that we but brought here, dragged against our will on a ship. Doesn't matter that we were intentionally made to forget who we are. And that's the thing that pisses me off, is when we act like, oh, we don't even know, ourselves as being African, blah, blah, blah. That was very intentional. It's very intentional that you don't see yourselves as African. And I'll read a little bit later in the article. He makes the argument that, well, when Jesse Jackson said African American, I mean, he just came up with that, but we're not really that. We're more like a person of color or Negro. Like, no, we're African. The other thing is, our DNA is African. Understand that. There's a reason why our ancestors who were brought here had to be brought here. And that was because they were African. If you know history, you know there were other people who were brought here and enslaved prior to Africans being brought here. Whites were brought here, Europeans were brought here, but because of their, because something with their biology, they couldn't withstand the conditions of slavery. Native Americans who were already here, they tried to enslave them, but because of their biology, they also could not withstand the conditions of slavery. The only ones who were able to withstand the conditions of slavery, the heat, the hardship, and not catch the European diseases were Africans. So genetically, we have to be different. To say that we're all the same, it's just the pigment. Well, what about the fact that whenever you have Africans inside of certain sports and they have the ability or they're given the resources they need to be superb athletes, why is it that they outperform a lot of times other people? Why is there Serena Williams? Why is that basketball is predominantly African people? All of these things show you that it's not just us being African, it's not just our color of our skin. It's something in our DNA. It's our culture. That's why our music is always so soulful. To say that it's just us being, descendants of slavery, if you go to Africa or you talk to Africans or you really immerse yourself in African culture, you're going to understand just how much of our culture here in America, Africans in America, descendants of slavery, whatever you want to call us, is truly descendant from the cultures that we have brought from Africa. The ways that we move, our body movements, the ways that we sing, our soul, all of these things are from our culture in Africa. So why you would want to identify yourself as a descendant of slavery instead of being an African, I don't know. So he goes on to say, and also due to the origins of the term African American, which Jesse Jackson first introduced nationally in 1989 in order to provide a somewhat more precise marker of identity in this country for the lost progeny of slavery. Prior to this, American descendants of slavery were regarded as black or Negro or colored. But what African Americans weren't on a national basis was African. And despite its obvious flaw of joining a highly disconnected continent in a single country, the term took root in the nation's consciousness and regrettably created widespread confusion about what being black in America is, since before slavery was abolished. What being black in America since before slavery was abolished actually meant, rooting a confusion of fractured nationality. I said it before, there was a reason why they wanted us to not see ourselves as African. If you see yourself as African, you're not going to be a slave, because when you have a culture, you know where you're from, where you know who you are, you're more than likely to not be willing to subject yourself to slavery. You're not, if you think about it, their goal was not to create, a people who was knowledgeable of themselves. Their goal was to create a people who could be manipulated, a goal to create a people who would love the master more than themselves. And the only way that you're going to get that is if you essentially brainwash the person and make them think that they're not from anywhere. So we still have this today. I know a lot of people who would refuse to call themselves African, and they'll be dark as whatever, clearly African, have the features. They don't understand that ethnicity, is not nationality. But these people will not say that they're African. And the reason is because we've been told that we should be happy with being a middle person. We're not truly American because, as Malcolm said, if we were American, we wouldn't have to deal with these issues and fight to be recognized as Americans. But we're not African because, we weren't born in Africa. So we're nothing. We're a middle ground. We're a people without identity, a people devoid of culture, a people devoid of origin. And our only culture that we have was by way of us being enslaved. Understand, if you refuse to call yourself African, which is your choice, you are saying that your history began in slavery. That you are saying that you have nothing to do with the fact that humanity originated in Africa. Some of the most creative philosophers, artists, architectures, philosophers, like so many brilliant people. Mansa Musa, the richest person in history, the warrior. I mean, there's so many people in African history who show you it's such a rich history. You should truly desire to have this history and identify with this history. But if your belief is that your history began in slavery, so your beginning was as a slave, you were never a liberated person. So my question is, if you were never a liberated person, what precedent do you have to now want to be liberated? Because it's one thing if I was liberated, and I remember that I was liberated. I remember that my people had a great civilization. I remember before colonialism that we were able to build so many great things. We were able to have so many great empires, Empire of Kush, the Nubians. We were able to have the Zimbabwe, the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, rich empires, rich cultures. But if I'm saying that I'm not an African, so my only reference of beginning is slavery, then you really have no other thing to look at as far as where you will be going, as far as other than just being a more liberated slave in America. So I always question people when they feel like they're boosting themselves up by not claiming who they are, which is African. Because again, I mean, if you want to identify with your slavery, your enslavement more than your history prior to that, it doesn't make any sense to me personally. Now, moving on. So he goes back to talk about a few articles that came out of people who are African or people who were encouraging relations with Africans and are discussing relations with Africans versus African Americans. And the danger with this is whenever we look at Africans and say, hey, all of y'all think that we don't want to deal with y'all, or all of y'all think that y'all think y'all, but we better than y'all, all these things. Anytime you generalize anything, you're doing the same thing that you don't want to be done. Because I know I don't like whenever I hear Africans say, well, all African Americans, they don't want to mess with me. In the same way, they don't like hearing, well, all Africans feel like they're better than African Americans. So doing it to each other is not going to enrich the conversation. You're essentially just going in a circle and doing the same thing that you were accusing the other person of doing. So he says, in recent weeks, several pieces have been released by African immigrants or their direct offspring, which misrepresent or seek to undermine a specific identity of American descendants of slavery. One more time, I have to say this. Why do you not want to be, the term African American, I don't even like that because it's not, African American is not an ethnicity. My ethnicity is African. But why would you want to identify as descendant of slavery? That's all you are? You don't know about the people that came before slavery? You don't know about the empires? You don't know about the richness of the continent you came from? You'd rather be a descendant of slavery? To me, that's just some real plantation stuff to me. I'm sorry. And I'm not doubting this man's intelligence. I'm not doubting his, his passion for his people. But if you'd rather be a descendant of slavery, associate yourself with the slave master rather than your history prior to enslavement, it's just some plantation stuff to me. But moving on, from a piece just recently published on City Lab in which a woman from Kenya, an East African country, tries to identify with American descendants of slavery, a complex people who were largely taken from West Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. The writer argues for solidarity based on skin color among American descendants of slavery and African immigrants because America is, as she writes, a caste system that puts melanin-rich humans at the bottom of the social hierarchy. However, at the same time, the writer makes a striking admission that within the countries on the continent of Africa, skin color would never be seen as that which binds people together in a common cause. In Kenya, racism was a concept that existed only in books and never in conversation. Tribalism is what we live with daily. Our identity was and still is ingrained in ethnicity, not in color. It explains why most African experience being called Black or African for the first time when they come to America. Neither Black nor Africans are conscious identity markers for Africans who are in Africa. So this is partially true. It is true what he says and what the article he's citing says. Prior to colonialism, prior to the extreme conditions that we live under, Africans were not identifying themselves as Black or African. You had the continent of mostly dark-skinned Black people who are of African ethnicity, but they more so identified themselves with their familial connections, with their tribe, with their clans. many of the great tribes that we know of today, so like the Ashanti or the Yoruba or Igbo, all those tribes really just started from familial ties, and they eventually evolved and became civilizations. So this is very true. They didn't historically see themselves as one continent. Now, should that mean that we should not now see ourselves as an ideal of African unity? No, absolutely not. Why did they start seeing themselves as one continent? And as much as you say, yeah, it's true, Africans in Africa might not see themselves as Black or see themselves as African. Many of the social commentary that came out of Africa came with the Pan-Africanist movement, and they were urging people to take mixed solidarity with the people who are similarly situated to them in order to defeat the biggest threat to their survival, and that was European colonialism. So you have to understand that everything has a reaction. Colonialism had a reaction, and the reaction was that met it. The equal reaction was Pan-Africanism. It was specifically set up to deal with the fact that regardless of what originally happened, and understand, originally Europeans were not united into the European Union, so that did not come about magically. It came about as a means of survival for some, but really a means of gaining capital, where the European powers would come together and seeing what's going on around the world, seeing the wealth in Africa, seeing the wealth in other places of the world, they would specifically sit down at a table and say, okay, you can have this country. We'll call this Rhodesia. And you can have this one. We'll call this the Gold Coast. So they would carve out different places in Africa, and they would assign different people to different places. Now, understand, if a revolution happened in, let's say, the Congo, the question is, and this is what is at the heart of the Pan-African thing, why is it that the United States, who was never a colonizer of Congo, but whenever Patrice Lumumba started talking about having total independence in Congo, why is it that the United States felt like they were threatened and that they had to go into Africa and they had to go into the Congo and that they had to overthrow this person and have him killed? The reason why has nothing to do with whether or not America was the predominant colonial force. Of course, it was Belgium who was the predominant one. But America, of course, has interest not only in the Congo, but in many other African countries. And if you notice, if one revolution happened in one place, if one radical Pan-Africanist became the leader of a certain country, then essentially that was a threat to any colonial power. So they're united, understand, in maintaining their exploitation. They're united in maintaining the system as it is. So because they're united in maintaining the system, united in maintaining the exploitation, we have to be united in rebelling. We have to be united in combating. We have to be united in saying, no, you can't have our resources. So that is why Pan-Africanism came about. Yeah, Africa was never just, one big continent where everyone knew each other. No, it was never that. Originally, it was divided into clans, divided into tribes, familial clans. That's what it originally was. However, as we know, at some point, it was carved up into boundaries that did not even represent the clans that existed. So why would we even, not understand that the clan situation is not even realistic today, because a lot of those people have been divided by colonialism. But understanding that is what happened. They came together to subjugate us to them. They came together for slavery. They came together to all collectively come together and say, we're going to have to take them out in order to get what they want. And if we don't understand that, the only way we can fight back is together. Because guess what? You're not a threat. African Americans. I did a video recently where I was trying to explain to African Americans that don't make the mistake that the Haitian Revolution made, and that is thinking that, we can do this without having anyone else. Because frankly, the reason why the Haitian Revolution didn't go forward is because once that revolution was over and they got their independence for their particular island, then outside of their island, they had no one to defend them. And the United States and France was about to go ham on them because they could not let this happen. They could not have a free African nation inside of their hemisphere that killed all these white people and that overthrew colonialism. So understand that us here, we're not enough to do this on our own. The only way that we can survive is by having people to back us, people to support us. If you do not want to go back to Africa, me personally, I will, whenever my time has come, go back to Africa. But if you don't want to go back to Africa, then you should not feel comfortable living in the United States if you are only by yourself, segregated from having anyone to advocate on your behalf. That being said, I want to move on to Miss Yvette Carnell. So she put out a lot of tweets. And I'm just going to respond to a couple of them that I think need a response. And again, my issue with her is more so, why put so much energy trying to discredit people, for thinking certain ways? Why not put the energy into hearing the solutions? Because my thing is, I still haven't heard from her how it is that what she says is going to be better is actually going to be better. Because guess what? We can get our reparations, but they could also be taken from us. And if you get reparations, then what's going to stop them from still hurting you? What's going to stop them from still killing you? You're still living in a country under white supremacist rule. I've heard her criticize people who say that we should have a Black Wall Street. Well, guess what? They bombed Black Wall Street, so therefore your plan is dumb. And my answer to that is, guess what? They cut off Haiti and starved them out, even though they got their freedom. What makes you think that they can't do that to us if we get reparations? And maybe she has answers to this, but I'm saying that I hear her talk so much more about why other people are wrong that I just don't know what she's offering to say that she's right, and why she feels so strong that she's the almighty one who knows what's best for our people. Now, just one quote, and she's quoting another tweet that talks about Black people who hate on Pan-Africanism because they meet Black people and who hate Black people, which is foolish. African people who hate Black people, which is foolish. Says it's really because Pan-Africanism is more of a self-esteem booster than an actual political strategy. It's about time to take off that red, black, and green and get to work. How is Pan-Africanism how is it a booster? For real, I hear more of the self-esteem boosters from people who are the assimilationists and people who more so identify with America, because right now America's killing it. America is the richest country. They have all these businesses. If you live in America, you're going to be better than other people. And so I think a lot of more people that I know get self-esteem from identifying with this place. Pan-Africanism is not a self-esteem booster. And Pan-Africanism is very much a political strategy. If you need to know what the political strategy is, let me lay it out. The strategy is, again, us here, we are always going to be subjected to the wills of other people if we do not start fighting for our own wills. Now, while we are fighting for our own wills, we have to understand that our wills are a direct threat to American capitalism. Why? Because historically, African people in America have always been on the bottom. If you understand capitalism, there has to be someone who's poor. There has to be someone that's subjugated. Name a capitalist society that does not have a group who's going to be subjugated to the wills of the rich. So, which is why we can have tokenized people who are African who descend to high positions in America, but we cannot have the whole collective community because that would essentially offset the whole economy. Understand, after slavery, a lot of the same people who were slave owners were trying to get rid of us. The reason for trying to get rid of us is, what do we do with all these people? We can't let them, get to our status because that will totally disrupt the economic order for us. So what do we do with them? And the answer was to find a way to subjugate them. So understanding that, our progress, I guess is the word, us acceding to high positions economically or politically or socially is a direct threat to them maintaining their political power and their wealth to the degree that they want to maintain their political power and wealth. That is why we have to understand that we are really at class warfare as far as other people's wills and what they want. That being said, if we're at war with them, then when we try to get what we want, there's going to be resistance. if you have resistance, and this is for people staying in America, who want to stay in America, if you have resistance getting what you want, how are you going to be able to advocate for what you want if you don't have anyone backing you up, especially if there's people trying to take you out? That is why Pan-Africanism is a political strategy. Because if Africa is not free, then Africa will never advocate for you. If the Caribbean, Pan-Africanism is not just Africa. Pan-Africanism is about liberation for Haitians, Jamaicans, Afro-Latinos. If all of us are not free, then we can't back each other up, and we can't make sure that we're not taking advantage of in this system. So that is the political strategy as far as people trying to stay here. And of course, for us who want to go back to Africa, the political strategy is that we need to liberate Africa from neocolonialism and colonialism. That way that we can return to the continent where we came from, where we originated, and live among the people who we originated from. In a way that's truly meaningful and not going to be living in a neo-colonialistic world. So, another one, she says, I never said we couldn't have allies, but we need to define our group and prioritize our interests first. I don't even understand how or why that's controversial. Well, the controversial part, and I don't think it's controversial, I actually think what you're saying is widely held and widely believed by many people in the African community. But the reason why it's controversial for us who are Pan-Africanists is because if you're saying I get our interests first, is understanding that our interests are their interests. To go back and get into what Marcus Garvey said, is it a coincidence to you that if I go to America, I go to Europe, I go to China, I go to Africa, I go to Jamaica, I go to Bermuda, I go to any of these places, African people were all living in hell wherever you go? Do you think that's a coincidence that all of us are facing the same oppressor at the same time? Or do we all have the same oppressor? So if we all have the same oppressor all over the world in different type of localities and different places, then how do you prioritize your own self and fight adequately if you're not also realizing that it's not just you that's facing this, but it's a whole continent, a whole world that's facing the same thing? Why would you want to go up against this giant alone? And why would you think you could be successful? That's the bigger question. But whatever. So she also says self-interested politics works. As a matter of fact, it could be argued that politics is largely about group and individual self-interest amassing and expressing power. Absolutely, we have to be self-interested as a group. That is absolutely the truth. Now understand that self-interest politics work when you have people who are also seeing themselves in you. The reason why Israel was able to rise so quickly after the Holocaust and so many people were taken out is because they were literally, the Jewish people are literally all over the world. And if you don't think that they're advocating for Israel, you need to check and read some articles, because every single thing that they get from America, the Anti-Defamation League, of course, is the most famous one, but many of the Jewish organizations, they're advocating in their own individual countries in order to get wealth for themselves and wealth for Israel. So that's self-interest. It's self-interest, understanding that they're all connected. And that from that way, they are able to fight for themselves. So she says, I'm not cherry picking. There are, of course, a majority of good and decent Africans who aren't exploiting anyone. That still doesn't transfer Pan-Africanism into a workable or effective political strategy for Black American descendants of slavery, because she doesn't want to call herself African, I guess. The reason why this makes no sense is because Pan-Africanism, as I said, it is a political strategy. But let's look at the alternative, assimilationism. So you want to say Pan-Africanism doesn't work. We know why Pan-Africanism doesn't work, because the United States, as well as Europe and everyone, had cooperative missions to overthrow Pan-Africanist leaders. So this was very orchestrated, as well as COINTELPRO. Anytime there was Pan-Africanism was sought to be implemented inside of the continent, you would have the CIA or someone doing some type of thing in the background to essentially cause coups, to cause people to fail. This is well documented. Look it up in history. Assimilation, however, hasn't had the same drawback. They have not had the same fight to become legitimate in the eyes of the public. So my question is, if Pan-Africanism, you can argue it didn't work because people weren't able to fully carry it out due to United States cooperative missions, but as far in other Western countries. But assimilation had that opportunity to do that, and it still hasn't worked out. So what's your political strategy that is going to work out? That's the question. Again, it's so easy to try to say pointing at someone else and say, well, what you're saying doesn't work. But tell me why what you're saying. Tell me why reparations. So this is the crux of our argument. And I completely agree that African people in America should get reparations. But tell me, how has that worked out? What has it been since slavery? Over 100 years and we still haven't got reparations. How has that worked out? Getting reparations has been older. The fight for reparations is way older than the fight for Pan-Africanism. And that hasn't worked out. So tell me, how is that strategy working? How is that more effective? And your answer is you don't know. Because frankly, there's no reason why you should think that yours is more effective than the other. So, let's see. There is no, okay, let me go. Okay, this one. She says to someone, what are we going to do except ask whites? LOL, you're behaving as if African heads of state aren't being led by the West. This is very true. They are being led by the West. Do you know why they're being led by the West? Historically, you should know the history. That's like saying, oh, well, haha, the NAACP is led by whites. Absolutely. If you know the history of the NAACP, that was very strategic. We know that Nkrumah was overthrown by the United States. We know that Sankara was overthrown by them. We know that Steve Biko was conspired against with the West as well. We know that all the Pan-Africanist leaders, we know that Lumumba, we know that Sekou Touré. We know that these people were part of conspiracies to be overthrown by the United States government. So why pretend that we magically got to this place where African heads of states are being ran by the United States? If you know your history, you know that there's a reason for that. And by the way, I encourage everyone to read this book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We know that they're still being made to comply with the United States. Because frankly, if you don't comply as far as accepting these bribes from the governments, they are fully ready to take you out. So we know the situation. We know why we're here. So let's not pretend that Africans are being led by the West because they just run to them. No, the West needs them. And that's why they have to do what they have to do to try to put their people in there who are going to favor their policies. So don't understand why we would pretend, but we don't know why it is what it is. She says, there is no disdain for Africa or Africans among Black American descendants of slavery. In fact, there's usually a sort of kinship which I view as mostly imaginary. Our history is linked mostly to West Africa, so why is fellowship to a continent with 54 countries? Again, Pan-Africanism is a reaction to what happened on the continent, and that was colonialism. So all except for one African country, Ethiopia, which eventually was colonized at some point, briefly, but pretty much just other than Ethiopia, every single country was colonized. All of them were facing the same exact fight. All of them are facing the depletion of their economies, and all of them still are today. So the common sense thing would be to realize that we are all connected because we are facing the same things here in America that they're facing in Africa, the country of their origin. So that's what the political connection is. But as far as the cultural connection, again, our music, the way we talk, the way we move, our continents, our family structure, so much has been still retained, even though, and understand, if you go to like Jamaica, I keep saying Jamaica, I know there's other Caribbean countries. If you go to the Caribbean, you'll notice that the Caribbean people, for the most part, were able to keep their African culture. A lot of them speak patois or, some type of infusion of African languages with whatever country colonized or enslaved them. So they still have a lot of their culture in their countries. And the reason why America, we don't really have that, again, it was intentional. Because frankly, they really wanted to make sure that we didn't identify with no one. That's the thing that pisses me off the most when people say, well, why do you feel connected to this continent? That is the exact agenda of the oppressor. They wanted us to feel not connected. They wanted us to feel helpless. They wanted us to feel like they were our master. And people are still advocating to look at the United States. This is our master. This is who we get things from. Please give us this. We don't want anyone else because we don't know anyone else. So this is our mentalities that were put into us from slavery intentionally. So to embrace them and to say, well, we don't have any connection to them, to me shows that you don't understand that this is an agenda. And it has been an agenda. So, okay, let's see. So numbers equals power. And I think in this one, she's basically saying, it's a response to a tweet that says, it's because there were maybe 40 million descendants of slavery in the United States in a country with 250 million whites. The numbers basically are the political strategy. She says, so numbers equals power. Tell that to poor Nigerians living off less than $2 a day with Nigerian heads of state. I'm really starting to think that you don't know your history. Because if you knew your history, you would know that this is not an accident. Colonialism was something done by the West to keep Africa without access to their economic reserves. This is the thing. And my understanding of her theories is that it's that we need to get political wealth, and that way we can get or political power. That way we can get economic wealth. If you understand economic wealth, Africa is the richest continent on the face of this planet, which is why it's also the poorest continent. There are people who are constantly trying to get access to their resources. So as far as Nigeria, or really any African country, a lot of our people are suffering. But if you know what's going on there, you know that the countries outside of Africa are taking the same resources from them, and they're basically using them to build this country. So the fact that colonialism exists, we're supposed to look at that as evidence that numbers don't work? No, that doesn't make sense. If anything, you should understand that in colonialism, and this is the thing that gets me the most, the agenda is to keep us separate. Because separate, you're nothing. You can't fight this thing by yourself. If you're separate, you can't do anything about your situation. But if you're together and you're working together and you're fighting for something together, that's when you're a threat. So, yeah. Solidarity requires specific terms of agreement. It requires political exchange and mutual benefits. The idea that just being Black or African automatically equals political sameness / shared ideology is nascent in terms of understanding how political agreements are reached. Arrangements are reached. I feel like I already addressed this point. She said, again, we should have allies, but that needs to be based on some kind of mutual politics and power sharing arrangement. Being Black ain't enough. I think that's your capitalists talking, honestly, because first of all, if those are your people, and let's put this in another perspective. We know in Israel, you have people fighting for Israel that never been to Israel. You have Jewish people in America, in Europe, all over the world fighting for Israel to get the most protection and get the most reparations, because the United States, for some reason, gives Israel reparations, despite the fact that it did not do the Holocaust, that is not giving a cent to African Americans. We know that the Jewish people advocate for Israel. The mutual benefit is this is who you are, and this is who they identify as being. This is their heritage. If this is our heritage and we are African, and there is a mutual benefit, but I'm not going to argue it because, I already explained, first of all, the need for Pan-Africanism. But understanding that you shouldn't be thinking to get a mutual benefit in order to fight for yourself. And that's the basic issue. If you don't see that you're fighting for yourself and you think you're fighting for some foreigner over there, then you're not going to understand that this is not just about fighting to liberate Africans. This is about our cultural lineage. This is about the people who we descended from, the people who still live in us. This is about the acceptance of our true identities. You know, American is not an identity, that's a nationality. You can't practice American. You know, you can try to create something that's a culture, but at the end of the day, your true culture that's been stolen from you, that you should feel possessive over because it was stolen from you, is African. So I think that's the last tweet I'm going to respond to. I'm just going to conclude this by saying this is not to hate on Yvette Carnell. I try not to hate on anyone, but it's just to say overall, hopefully moving forward, we can learn to put out positive energy towards other ideologies. Notice, you never really hear me going on anyone, except for in instances like this where I feel like I have to, because you're not speaking power to the people. You're speaking division. You're speaking, I know more than all of you, and you should all think like me. But it's important for us to allow each other to think differently. I know I have people who follow me that are Pan-Africanists, and I will continue to advocate Pan-Africanism, but by no means are you to be looked down on for not seeing yourselves as Pan-Africanists. You know, we're all have different experiences. I became a Pan-Africanist out of experience. The more I came to understand about racism, the more I understood that our problem is not national, it's international. As Malcolm X said, it's not about civil rights, it's about human rights. So that's all I will say about this. It's a longer video than I usually do, but I'd love to hear your comments, and I will see you on another video.